For those of you listening who are professional brewers, I'm here to tell you that planning brew schedules just got easier. Starting now, Imperial Yeast guarantees that commercial orders up to 20 liters of 3 of their most popular strains will ship free if they're not in stock when you place your order. So in addition to pitching right with the highest quality yeast on the market, they're promising that yeast will be ready when you need it or shipping is on them. A rad deal from a rad company. Whether you're a pro or a home brewer, if you haven't tried Imperial Yeast in your brewery yet, it's time to up your game. You can check out everything Imperial Yeast has to offer and place your commercial orders at imperialyeast.com. According to some of the most recent survey data, a good majority of homebrewers rely on all-grain brewing methods, meaning they go through the process of mashing crushed grains for a period of time before separating those grains from the sweet wort and proceeding with the boil. For beginners who are just dipping their toes in the brewing waters, so to speak, this process can seem convoluted and difficult, which likely explains the reason over 70% of homebrewers start off using an ingredient intended to simplify the brewing process. You're listening to the Brewlosophy Podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott, and on this episode, contributor Cade Job and I will be talking about the different types of malt extract.
Yeah, I mean, I was definitely one of that 70%. I started doing a Mr. Beer kit, which is just straight extract. I think it's where a lot of people start, but I also think that this is something that, even advanced brewers can use if you want to. So
I know a lot of brewers who are primarily all grain who are still, supplementing with malt extracts, for whether they're making big beers or whatever, for sure.
Yeah, totally. And I don't know how many people would admit it, but if you're missing your numbers, I guarantee you people aren't going and doing a second mash to raise their OG to what they intended. So we got a lot to talk about. This is going to be a fun episode.
Absolutely. I definitely started off, like you said, by using malt extracts. I was a extract with steeping grains guy when I first got started. In fact, back when I first got into homebrewing, I was taught that fly sparge was the only other option. This was way back in 2003. I don't even know if people were batch sparging too often back then. But as an apartment brewer, that just seemed like way too much. And then over multiple batches, I definitely learned a few things, developed some opinions about malt extracts, which I look forward to discussing with you in this show. All right, if you're a fan of what we're doing here at Brewlosophy, we would seriously appreciate it if you consider becoming a patron by visiting patreon.com/Brewlosophy, where for a small monthly pledge, you'll receive rewards like access to unpublished recipes, participation in private patron forums, unique discounts at Yakima Valley Hops, and an invite to a monthly live Q&A with someone in the brewing world. Coming up in November is the developer of what many agree is the best brewing software on the market, Beersmith, as well as the host of the Beersmith podcast, Brad Smith. I've known Brad for a few years now, and in addition to knowing Beersmith better than anyone on earth, predictably, he's incredibly knowledgeable when it comes to recipe design and other homebrewing topics as well. Past guests have included folks like John Palmer, Vinny Chilurzo from Russian River, and Dr. Tom Shellhammer, and the videos of all of those can be accessed whenever you like in our private patron Facebook group. Learn more about becoming a patron over at patreon.com/Brewlosophy. And if you wouldn't mind using the links found at brewlosophy.com/support when you're shopping online, we would really appreciate that as well. Your shopping experience doesn't change a bit, and we get a little kickback for the referral. All right, feedback this week is brought to you by Brewers Hardware, who offer brewers beautiful stainless gear from fittings, kettles, and fermenters to brew stands and incredibly well-built turnkey systems. Do yourself a favor and head over to brewershardware.com the next time you're in the market for brewing equipment. They're sure to have whatever it is you need, and make sure you mention Brewlosophy at checkout to receive a free gift. Again, that's brewershardware.com. Listener Chris Campbell wrote in with some feedback on our recent double dry hop episode that we recorded up in Yakima. He said, I was waiting for you guys to mention the floating dip tube, and he's referring to the clear beer draft system here when talking about keg hopping. When I keg hop, I just chuck pellets into a sanitized keg, purge as much oxygen as I can, then do a pressurized transfer onto those loose hops. I've never had much vegetal flavors. The hop taste and aroma is insane, and the hops stay at the bottom of the keg. The floating dip tube gives you a perfectly clean pour all the way to the last pint. It's amazing. I've actually changed out all 6 of my kegs to clear beer draft systems, and I'll never go back.
Oh, awesome. I wish I that's one of those things that's on my Christmas list. Maybe I'll tell the wife, or if she listens to the podcast, that'd be a good idea for a Christmas gift for me. But those things look really cool. I love the science behind them. I love that it seems to work. I hear a bunch of really solid anecdotes. Never actually tried it myself, but it seems like it solves a problem and gives us another opportunity to get hop aroma and flavor into our beers.
Absolutely. I love the idea, and I'm honestly shocked that we didn't think to talk about it in that particular episode, because the clear beer draft system was originally designed to help people get clear beer quicker, so they're not pulling from the bottom of the keg, they're pulling from the top of the keg. If people don't know what that is, it's just a floating dip tube, basically, that you connect to the you actually replace your dip tube in your keg with a small one that looks just like the dip tube you use for your gas line, and then you connect some rubber hose to that, and then there's a floating dip tube that kind of floats atop the beer in the keg, and then pulls beer from the top, and so it just seems absolutely genius to use that for keg hopping as well. Leave behind all of that cruddy hop material because you're pulling beer from the top. I just cannot believe we didn't talk about that. I have a few of those clear beer draft systems on hand. I use them all the time as well, and so I'll definitely be giving this a shot. Thanks for the feedback, Chris. And if you have show feedback, you can send it to feedback@brewlosophy.com or drop us a note on social media. One of my favorite styles of beer is Schwarzbier, a dark beer that beautifully melds mild porter-like flavors with quintessential lager characteristics. It's absolutely delicious. Well, homebrewer Carl Helmstetter, who shares my passion for Schwarzbier, he brewed up a clone version of one of his favorite examples from Devil's Backbone and sent me some to try.
1 minute beer review with Jersey and Tim.
This one's dark. I can't smell anything.
Then why do you keep sniffing it?
I give it a chance at least. It's all right.
What a stellar review.
It's got roasty.
Obviously, you need me.
It has that.
Roasty. Sweeter. It's sweeter than I expected. It's sweet. Sweet roasty. I like it a lot. But I like all of these dark beers like this. That lot, like very little fizz, a lot of flavor. Like, this is good. This is a good beer, and you're dumb.
It's not that good.
You're dumb, and this is good. I like it. Why don't you like it? Because you're not learning, or is there a reason?
It doesn't have an aftertaste, but it has something like right before. I don't know.
It's called flavor, you dumbass. Well, it's delicious.
It's not. It's not the flavor I like.
You like Miller Lite, which has no flavor.
Oh, it's full of flavor. It's a fine Pilsner.
It's true. I mean, it does say right there, a fine Pilsner. It says it
on the can. I'm looking at it right now.
And a marginally average Pilsner.
Yeah, you know.
Uh-huh. You're realizing that you were wrong.
Yeah.
Say it.
That I'm stupid.
Tim was wrong, and this is a very delicious beer.
Tim am wrong.
Oh, well,
and it's a okay delicious beer.
Oh, okay.
It's not 100%.
Well, maybe it's just not your thing, bro. Yeah, I like that a lot. Come on, that's delicious. It's not too forceful. It's just getting some light flavors. It's delicious. It's very, very delicious. You're dumb. You're dumb, and this is delicious. I love you. I love you.
I'm going 4.
I think our scale is fundamentally it's becoming apparent to me that it means nothing, and it has no basis in math.
Actually, anything we say doesn't mean anything.
Would you rate this average or above or below average?
I would say above average because I've had a lot worse.
Okay, I'm going to say above average as well.
This beer, honestly, was fantastic. I know that Tim has a thing where when he's trying new styles that he may not be totally familiar with, he struggles to get over that first initial hump of unfamiliarity. I think that's what it is. But the fact that he sort of came around and ended up enjoying the beer, at least a little bit, I thought was pretty good. I feel like Carl nailed it. I would have consumed bottle after bottle of his Schwarzbier.
Oh, nice. I love a good Schwarzbier. I mean, the Kostreitzer being like the world-class example. But one of my favorites is here in Austin. Austin Beer Works has a seasonal one that's actually out right now that they call Black Thunder. And it's incredible. I love that beer. And it's perfect for this time of the year, especially in Texas. It's still hot outside, but you got sort of some of those nice dark malty flavors. It's still a light-ish beer. You're not killing yourself with it. But it tastes so good. I love a good. I wish I could have tried some of that Carl made.
He did a very good job. My understanding is that he got the recipe from Devil's Backbone, and little secret here. He actually sent me a version of Devil's Backbone to have the guys review as well. That one will be coming up in a later episode.
Oh, fun! I can't wait to hear that.
Yeah, but I'll tell you what. I tasted them side by side, and I won't go too deep on the Devil's Backbone one yet. But they were very close. And again, this is a style that I hold near and dear to my heart. I've been brewing Schwarzbier for about 6 years now. he did a really good job.
And props to you, Carl, because I mean, if you're able to match at a homebrew level what those guys at Devil's Backbone are doing, that's a good brewery. So if you're able to get close to that, I mean, good job, dude. You're doing great.
Absolutely, and I believe Devil's Backbone is one of those one of the craft breweries that was bought out by, I don't know if it was AB InBev or whatever. So, but they're doing good work. I don't care who owns them. Their beers are fantastic. Carl, you nailed it, buddy. So good job on that one. If you'd like to have your beer or any other fermented beverage reviewed by Jersey and Tim, you can email me, Marshall@brewlosophy.com, and we'll get you all set up. All right, we'll be right back after this short break. So I've been hanging out with brewers and craft beer nerds for a long time now, and while we do occasionally have our differences, one thing it seems we all share is a love of learning and trying new things, as well as saving a couple of bucks. Well, right now, Craft Beer and Brewing is helping fans of Brewlosophy learn more while saving some coin by offering 20% off the price of a subscription to their awesome magazine. Chock full of brewing insights, tips, and recipes from industry experts, Craft Beer and Brewing is seriously great. I read every issue page to page myself. To get 20% off your subscription, all you have to do is sign up at beerandbrewing.com/brewlosophy. Chilling work can be a chore, especially after a long brew day, but not with the Exchillerator Counterflow Chiller, which can chill a 5-gallon or 19-liter batch of wort in 5 minutes or less, leading to a strong cold break and clear wort in the fermenter. Brewlosophy's Matt Del Fiacco uses the Exchillerator Max and absolutely loves it. In addition to improved chilling efficiency, every Exchillerator comes with a 5-year warranty that covers the entire chiller for manufacturer defects. If you're looking to up your chilling game and a CFC is right for you, head over to exchillerator.com today. Want to brew quality craft beer at home? The Grainfather provides a brewing system with superior design, innovative features, and the latest technology, allowing you to brew professional quality craft beer at home. Mash, sparge, boil, and cool all in one unit, meaning there's less equipment to use, clean, and store. No need for burners or hot plates. Just plug it in and brew great beer. Then get the best out of your fermentation with the Grainfather conical fermenters and glycol chiller. Plus, enhance your brewing experience with the brand new free-to-use Grainfather community app. You can take your brewing tools and your recipes with you everywhere, use brewing calculators on the fly, manage your recipes, and monitor your brew session from anywhere. Use your mobile device to manage your Grainfather brew wirelessly, automate mash schedules, and multitask without removing any of the brewing hands-on fun. Grainfather products can all be found at www.grainfather.com. Plus, as a Brewlosophy podcast listener, get 10% off your order. Just use discount code Brewlosophy19 at checkout. That's BRULosophy19 to receive 10% off your order. So head to shop.grainfather.com now to get this great deal. I bought my original homebrew kit from a North Corner Brew Supply in Bellingham, Washington, way back in 2003. I had no clue what I was doing, which meant I relied entirely on what I was told by the folks running the shop to determine what was best. In the back of this particular shop were these huge blue barrels laid on their side, filled with a sticky liquid that customers were encouraged to collect from themselves, which I thought was pretty cool. I was informed that this liquid malt extract was superior to dry versions. So that's what I stuck with. In fact, I never used dry malt extract because that was, when you're new into homebrewing, you basically just listen to the folks that are telling you how to brew. And I was told that liquid malt extract was the superior product. And so that's what I always used until I ended up jumping into all grain. Now, before we get too deep into talking about the differences between dry and liquid malt extract, let's spend a minute talking about malt extract in general.
Yeah, of course. I mean, that's a great place to start. I mean, malt extract is what we do as brewers. I mean, we're making wort. It's taking the malted barley, running it through a mash, and then extracting out sugars, converting the starches into sugars, extracting it out, and creating malt extract or wort. I mean, that's what we do as brewers. So I think, we're going to be talking about on this episode are the commercial versions of liquid malt extract or dry malt extract that are produced commercially, that are produced by suppliers. You can go to the homebrew store and purchase them. But from a really high level perspective, we do this. I mean, this is what all grain brewers do. All grain brewers create malt extract whenever they go through a mash and all that stuff. So I think it's cool to sort of step back and look, because people always, I mean, there's a really pervasive, I'm not going to call it, maybe it is a bias, a real persuasive bias that, LME or DME are crappier or not as good because they're commercially produced. They have. I think even Marshall, you may have some biases.
Oh, big time. I'll admit them too.
But I mean, from a high level perspective, malt extract commercially produced is just a dehydrated version of what you and I are doing, Marshall, whenever we're doing a full all grain batch.
Well, they're condensed versions, and we could, we'll spend some time talking about what, I mean, purportedly, or I guess experientially, that condensation process does to the extract. When you think about malt extract in regards to brewing, now, obviously these extracts are used for other things as well. You can buy malt extracts for cooking and whatnot. But as it regards specifically brewing, the entire reason they exist is to basically make the process easier. That's the best I could find, is that, you've got these maltsters, and I think Brees is probably one of the biggest ones out there who's still making malt extracts. But you've got these maltsters who are performing the mash for you. They are using specific water profiles, so you don't have to worry about that so much, or at least people who brew with malt extract will say that. And then they are creating a sweet wort, and then they are doing one of a couple different processes to condense that wort into a either a syrup or further down the line into a powder, and that's the dry malt extract. To me, I don't, there's no other real reason to make extracts like this except for to simplify or ease up the brewing process. And I think for a lot of brewers, some of that bias that you're referring to, and this is not where I come in. I actually don't care how easy the brewing process is. But I think for a lot of brewers, they're looking and saying, well, a part of the fun of brewing beer is and doing all of this thing, it's the DIY component of it, right? Doing all of this myself.
Yeah, heck yeah. I mean, I'm teaching a homebrewing 101 class right now for some people here in Austin. And the way I described sort of like LME and DME is it's kind of like buying a box cake mix at the store, right? Like you go to the store, you got this box cake mix, you come and you add eggs or some oil to it, and then you put it in the pan and you bake it. Right, it's sort of that same thing. It makes it much easier. It's really hard, or not hard, but it's much more difficult to actually make a cake from scratch, right? And so that's where I think it does save a lot of time using LME and DME.
Absolutely.
And then there's some other reasons that we'll get into too. But you touched on a couple of things. For brewing, that's certainly what it's for. But malt extract actually can be used for a bunch of different things. Kind of a fun historical tidbit, because I didn't know this. Malt extract was actually used as a nutritional supplement for British, working class kids that didn't have good nutrition. It's a high source of vitamins and minerals. And those of you that have ever tasted it, I think you can see why, especially LME. A nice syrup. Are you kidding me? Yeah. As a kid, I would have eaten the crap out of that.
Oh yeah, totally. It's like candy basically.
Yeah. But that's something you can do with malt extract too. Baking, use it as a sweetener. Put it in, a cake or a muffin or something. Honey and molasses are sweeteners that we use all the time. I'd be kind of interested to see, what if you substituted liquid malt extract in like a beer-based chili or something.
Oh yeah,
that might be pretty good.
Yeah, if anyone who's used, which I imagine most people have, who's used LME at least, that when you're licking your fingers after dealing with that sticky mess, it doesn't taste too bad. It's actually it's pretty tasty stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I was messing around with some last night. I'll talk about it in a minute, where I found that extract and what I did with it. I was messing around with some of it last night and actually ended up tasting it. And it's good. It tastes like molasses, like beery molasses. It's good stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I don't want to like oversimplify what it is, like what the liquid malt extract is, because you're right. There are some processing pieces of this that alter the character of LME and DME.
Yeah.
From what we do at a homebrewing scale, So, I mean, we're talking about essentially two types, and in this episode, we're going to go over your experiment where you compared liquid malt extract versus dry malt extract. But that's what we're talking about, commercially produced. And like Marshall said, liquid malt extract it's this grains like Brees. Brees is a big maltster, so they're using their grains. mixing it together in some proportion, which sometimes they're clear about, sometimes they're not clear about. And what I mean by that is maybe mixing, 2-row with pills or Maris Otter or
I think for
else,
the most part, like their pale malt extracts are typically something like 95% pale malt and then like 5% carapils. I don't quite understand why. It seems like it would be just cleaner to do a 100% full pale malt or Pilsner malt or whatever it is mash, but they do typically include a small portion of something else like carapils, I've noticed.
Yeah, I was wondering, I'm sure there's got to be some science behind it. I couldn't find anything good on that. But, I was thinking, okay, well, maybe the carapils, because it's a crystalline malt, it just gives a little bit of residual like protein. So there's a little bit of backbone there that stays in the malt, that stays in the syrup. And maybe that helps with the processing down the line. But that's totally speculation. I have no idea. But, that is, so liquid malt extract and DME, you're relying on the supplier. You're relying on Brees, and they're the ones that have control over what grains they're using, or like you said, what water profile, what mineral profile, and how those things come out.
Right. So you're basically by using malt extracts, what you're doing is you're saying, all right, up until the point of the boil, essentially, I'm going to leave the determinative factor of how this beer is going to turn out up until that point, at least, in the hands of the maltster. And I get why some people, and I guess you can clump me into this group, would be like, I want control of that. I want to be able to adjust those levers like mash temp and the exact types of malts that are going into my ultimate sweet wort. But for those who don't have the resources or the ability or the room or whatever it might be, malt extracts absolutely do. They do the trick, and you can make good beer using them, even if it is a little bit different. When it comes to the production of these different malt extracts, my understanding, and I talked to Brees about this a couple years ago. I'm no expert. They're kind of a little bit, and I understand why they would be, but they're a little bit evasive when it comes to describing their exact process for producing malt extracts. But originally my thought was, okay, they're making sweet wort and then they're boiling it down, condensing it into this syrup, right? That makes sense to me. That's not at all what they're doing. What they're doing is they're making the sweet wort, and then my understanding is they do like some sort of a cool evaporative process. I don't know if you read about this, Cade, but in essence, my understanding again is they're blowing like cool air over the top of slightly warm sweet wort and wicking off the liquid until it condenses down. The idea being they want to avoid any sort of Maillard reactions or scorching of that wort, but they end up with this very, very syrupy product in the end.
Yeah, controlled evaporation. So they're blowing that cold air over the top of it, and when it's doing that, the water is coming out of the liquid malt extract, and then they're vacuuming off the water moisture so that it condenses it down. And when I read this, I was like, oh, that kind of makes sense, because if you think about it, if you're just boiling it down, boiling, those Maillard reactions continue to happen, just like you said. So that evaporative process, I think, is one of the reasons why they do that and not boil. And we'll talk a little bit. One of the other sort of cons I have about liquid malt extract, and to some extent dry malt extract, is the lack of control over color.
That's a big one, actually.
Yeah.
in my opinion, if anyone who, again, you take liquid malt extract, just get from the same manufacturer, Pilsner liquid malt extract and Pilsner dry malt extract, and you put them next to each other, and you mix them to the same OG, they are going to look different. I mean, that's obvious.
Yeah, totally. But before we get too far into that, I'm going to back up. So we talked about, so that's how liquid malt extract is produced from the manufacturer. They use that evaporative process. And then DME, I was a little bit more hazy. Maybe, Marshall, you'd be able to clarify a little bit more on this since you've had conversations with Brees. But my understanding is essentially what they do is once they've got sort of the most moisture content that they can get, not the most maybe, but when they reach the point of diminishing returns from that evaporative process, they take that liquid syrup and then they put it into a centrifuge and essentially spin it super fast and suck all the rest of the moisture out. And that creates the crystalline, powdery, dry DME. dry malt extract substance.
I have heard 2 or 3 different ideas as to how DME is created. That was one of them, a centrifuge. Another one, they were saying they use like these columns of some sort. Regardless, every explanation that I've heard of how dry malt extract is made, it's further on down the line from LME, from the liquid malt extract. So it's not like they've got 2 completely separate processes. They're taking, again, they're very, very quiet on what they will share with us, but they're taking liquid malt extract and then making that dry malt extract. The thing that kind of I don't quite understand, well, there's a few things about this, is again that color difference, like you said. How is it that the liquid malt extract, when you're making dry malt extract from that same product, how is it that they look so different? But then what I really don't get is the bias that people have against one or the other when they're essentially the same product. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, totally true. I think, this is totally speculation again, but what I think is, one of the reasons why they do this and turn it into a DME and powdery substance is because those liquid, the moisture, the water in there has a potential to react, right? You can continue to react and have oxidative reactions that are going on inside of the liquid malt wort. So to me, it seems like there's probably some sort of, and this may just be a total overbroad characterization, but some sort of oxidative reaction that's continuing to happen inside of LME that stops or is reduced with DME.
Yeah, well, and you talk to some people and they will tell you that the reason that they use one or the other is because of the, and usually I'm hearing this as an argument for why you should use DME, is that it has a longer shelf stability. Like you can use a DME that's 2 years old and it's not going to turn dark. It's more shelf stable. It's not going to oxidize the way that LME will. And I believe we're not going to get too much into this, but I believe Malcolm did an experiment comparing, fresh and old LME, and there was definitely differences, not just in the way they looked, but I think people were able to taste the difference as well. So age matters when you're using at least liquid malt extract. I could see that as being an argument for DME. Yet, again, I was kind of brought up with the mindset that liquid malt extract is better, and I think a part of that is because it's less processed. You know what I'm saying? Liquid malt extract is made before the dry malt extract, and so maybe people look at that and they're like, "Well, hey, this is the best, freshest extract you're going to get." Further processing is just going to diminish the quality of that extract. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, of course. What else are you stripping out, right? Whenever you're dehydrating this all the way down, like what else are you stripping out? Is this just powdery sugar or another form of sugar? What else is in there?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I could totally see that from a processing standpoint. I mean, there's a bunch of reasons. There's pros and cons for both, right? Yeah. I mean, pros and cons for liquid and dry malt extract. Like one of the things that's in my opinion, one of the best things for liquid malt is it's so much easier to dissolve in water than using DME. I
feel like opinion's going to come in on this one. I agree with you. It dissolves immediately almost, but at the same time, it's such a pain in the ass to get everything out of the container.
Totally is. It's such like a sticky mess.
Oh, it's so sticky. And I actually think it'd be a good idea to go over how you and I, like the tricks that we've learned for adding malt extracts, both liquid and dry, to hot water or whatever. But the few times that I've used liquid malt extract in the past few years, it literally like creates spider webs, they get blown away and you find little
the syrupy trails.
Oh, syrupy trails everywhere. Such a pain in the ass. Yeah.
Yeah, like the syrup drops that drop on your countertop, and it's like, and then you have to end up scraping it off like with a spatula or something. No, I mean, so I started using liquid malt extract as like the main fermentable sugar in the boil, and I would add it at the boil. Over the years, I've sort of realized. A couple of things. So first of all, it's much easier to add liquid malt extract to warm water not cold water.
Yeah.
Or lukewarm or room temperature. I made the mistake of doing that once early whenever I was brewing, and it just turns into almost like a block of ice.
Yeah, it's like a hard rock candy type of thing.
It turns into rock candy, exactly. And so, first thing is make sure that water is warm, and really, the warmer the water is, the more that it actually mixes up, in my opinion. Yeah. So adding it to warm water, but flip side, don't add it into boiling water, especially if you've got direct heat.
Oh my God.
On that boiling water.
Bad idea.
I have ruined a pot before. You're essentially just dumping condensed syrup into the bottom of that pot, and unless you're stirring like crazy, whisking it and pouring slowly, it just creates a sticky mess at the bottom of your pot. And if it's on direct heat, that stuff's going to turn into hard rock candy stuck to the bottom of your pot.
Oh yeah, it'll scorch and it will ruin your beer. I mean, anyone who's had a scorched liquid malt extract beer knows the flavor of burnt LME. In the finished beer. So I can
smell it right now.
Exactly. I can smell. Yeah, exactly. Just thinking about it is reminding me not to do that. My typical process, it kind of depends on where I get my LME from. Like if I buy liquid malt extract from More Beer, they usually send it in a bag. If you're just buying their kind of run of the mill LME, they package it themselves. It's in a bag. No offense to More Beer, that is the biggest pain in the ass, man, because it's so hard to get. What I like to do is soak the LME in whatever container it's in hot water. While I'm bringing my, my brewing liquor up to temp, I'll soak the whole container in hot water just to loosen that LME up, and then I'll pour it in to the hot water, and then add some of that hot water to the container. Swirl it around, try to get as much of that extract out of the container as possible. Those bags are it's hard to do that with. Your hands are really close to the hot, wort at this point while you're doing it. So what I prefer are Breeze packages their LME in these nice plastic containers. It's really easy just to pour the extract out, scoop up some of the hot wort that's in the kettle, swirl it around, and you can get pretty much all of the extract out when you do that. Again, it is absolutely important that you turn your burner off, whether you're using an electric element or you're using a propane, a burner out in the garage or whatever. Turn off your source of heat. Incorporate that extract as best you can, and then click your heat back on so that you're able to start your boil and whatnot. Otherwise, you are going to get some scorching.
Yeah, for sure. And one of the things that I also developed over doing this after 4 or 5 batches was adding the LME at different times in the boil. So I don't add the full. When I should say, when I was brewing on my stovetop, I had a 3-gallon pot, and that was it. So I wasn't adding the full 7 or 8 pounds or whatever the recipe called for of LME up front, because I found that it still continued to scorch. And my own personal anecdote, to me, it really changed the color too if you added it much earlier. So what I started doing was splitting my LME additions. So I would add maybe half or a third at the beginning, so that the hops had some malt to interact with. Mm-hmm. But then I would add the majority of it at like 5 or 10 minutes, just so that it was sanitized, but no caramelization, no Maillard reactions, none of that was happening.
Yeah, that I heard about people doing that when I was well into brewing all grain, so it's not something I ever focused too much on. The only thing I could think of when it comes to making multiple additions is you do have to adjust your OG, right? Because if you're not boiling off, in my mind at least, maybe I'm off on this, but if you're adding all of that extract at 60 minutes and then boiling it for 60 minutes, you're going to get more condensation, right?
Yeah, totally. Absolutely.
So yeah, if you're going to add it all into the last 10 minutes, then your OG, you're just going to have to adjust, I guess. But you can, with programs like Beersmith, you could just plug in that you're going to add it at 10 minutes, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. And Beersmith will automatically do that calculation for you.
Okay, yeah.
So that's when I started doing that. And it changes the boil off and all that kind of stuff, which is great. But that raises that's a good segue into the next one. You talked about like if you're having to adjust your OG, right? Well, one of the best ways that I've found to adjust your OG if you miss it by a few points or something like that is to use DME, dried malt extract. So have you ever done that? Do you use dry malt extract to adjust OG? I mean, I haven't done it in a while because I've been dialed in my system.
I've never actually had to adjust, or I just don't adjust my OG too much. So I've never used DME for OG adjustment, which is weird for how many batches I've made, you know?
Yeah. I mean, before I got my grain mill and was able to really control my efficiencies to a high level, you know, because up to that point, even doing all grain batches, the grain crush at the store was different. And, you know, I mean, those things get a lot of use. So sometimes they just, you know, shimmy out of place a little bit.
Oh,
and
sure.
You get a different grain crush, and it ends up, you know, resulting in different efficiencies or different OGs down the road.
Yeah.
But you know, even brewing with extract, there was still a tendency, especially whenever I was a more beginning brewer, to miss my OG by, you know, 10 points, 5 points, something like that. And of course, whenever you're first brewing, you know, you drop a cube of ice in the kettle and you're like, oh my God, it needs to be sanitized. Do I need to throw the whole thing out? You know, so missing your gravity points by 5 or 10, you know, 10 points is probably a lot, but 5 points, you know, doesn't really matter.
No, I don't
but
care.
I found an easy way to do that. And Beersmith has a calculator, Brewer's Friend has a calculator. There's a bunch of calculators out there for adjusting your gravity by just adding a little bit of malt extract to it if you come under. And I found the easiest way to do that is dry malt extract. Why? Because you can just scoop it out with a measuring cup. You're not dealing with that syrupy mess trying to pour it in and dealing with the spider tails and the drops and you know, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So that's one of the ways that I've really liked to use dry malt extract.
Yeah. Well, and you know, I kind of did a little bit of talking on bad about how messy and annoying liquid malt extract is. Dry malt extract's not too much different. In fact, it's usually the powder is so fine that, you know, after you're done, the main reason that, you know, the very first time I ever used DME was when I started making starters. I mean, I was so against using dry malt extract that I bought it just to make starters with. But, you know, every time I would pour that dry malt extract through the funnel into my Erlenmeyer flask, you know, I'd come back 10 minutes later and there's just this fine film of powdery sweetness all over my counters, you know?
Yeah. Oh, totally. Yeah. I always joke that you can breathe near DME and it'll seize up and clump up. Like that's how dry that stuff is. Any moisture, if your house is even remotely humid, opening up the bag of dry malt or the container or whatever is going to cause it to clump.
Oh yeah, exactly. And that's one of the, you know, they say that dry malt extract is more shelf stable, but you have to be in an incredibly dry environment for that to be the case. We had a fairly, this was probably 2 or 3 years ago, we had a fairly humid like fall one time, and I had a bag of dry malt extract that I was using, you know, dipping into it for yeast starters. And I came back about a month after I'd opened this one. I closed it up. I sealed it really well, and it was hard as a rock. I mean, somehow a little bit of moisture got in there, and it was just it turned into this rock.
Yeah, totally. I had just one of those Tupperware containers, that's just got a lid that you snap on top of it. I had DME in that and left it in there for, I don't know, 6 months, 7 months, something like that. And whenever I came back to it, it was a brick. Totally a brick, and as hard as a brick too.
Yeah. It's unusable unless you're throwing it all into the boil or whatever. When it comes to using DME, what I've found, some of the best approaches that I've come up with is to add it slowly and stir while you're adding it. Again, turn your heat off. It won't sink directly to the bottom like liquid malt extract will, but you do have to stir it. You know, it's like any other powder. It's sort of like if you're adding flour to some liquid or whatnot. You just want to make sure to stir to incorporate it really well. You're going to get some clumps, but I found that clumping tends to go away in about 5 minutes as long as you're kind of stirring and the heat's on. So that's not too much of a deal. The steam from the kettle will carry away tiny little flecks of that stuff and can leave it in weird places in your house or your garage. So just be careful with that. But I've found dry malt extract slightly easier than liquid malt extract to use. And I think the main reason for that is because it's just not as messy. But again, I don't use either often enough, except for yeast starters nowadays. I've never used LME for a yeast starter. So I guess my experience with DME at this point is just, I've got more experience with it.
I mean, that's all I'm using it for these days is for starters whenever I do a starter. I mean, we're lucky with Imperial yeast that we don't have to do very many starters very often. But, whenever we're doing one, like actually, for example, I did one last night and I went to go get my DME And I realized I didn't have any. And I was like, oh, well, crap. I've got to get my starter going, brewing tomorrow. Need to get the starter going. So I was looking in my cabinet and I found this 3-year-old can of LME. Now it's a can, so it was sealed, like, from the manufacturer. It wasn't just like in a plastic container or something like that, but it was in a can. So I was just thinking, oh, well, LME, DME, kind of same thing. I mean, I'll need to use a little bit more LME than DME, but whatever, let's give it a try. Pouring and trying to pour LME into an Erlenmeyer flask, like the flask has so much LME on the outside of the flask. I mean, it was the biggest mess. So yeah, totally. For starters, DME, way to go. Oh, total clown car. I mean, like total. And then I set the can down, not realizing that there's a whole bunch of syrup that's dribbled down the side of the can. So now I've got like syrup stuck on my on my countertop.
Well, I'll tell you, we talk about it as if it's a huge pain, but for those who are unable to perform a mash on their own or who just don't have the ability to do so, liquid malt extracts are really a fantastic way to get into brewing and to be able to craft your own beer. We've got pretty extensive experience using both, and seeing as they do come from the same process, I'd always, I can't say that I've personally been convinced, but you often hear that, you can use either or to create the same end product. Even though I brew almost exclusively all grain these days, I still occasionally rely on malt extracts and have experience using both liquid and dry. Curious of just how different each one is, I designed an experiment to compare them for myself. Results from that when we return. As every brewer knows, the best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world, carrying everything from classics like Cascade to modern favorites like Galaxy and Mosaic, as well as other ingredients and gear. Yakima Valley Hops has it all. And don't forget to check out their new podcast, The Late Edition, where the YVH crew goes into depth on our favorite plant with industry experts. Head over to YakimaValleyHops.com now to see all they have to offer and subscribe to The Late Edition wherever it is you listen to podcasts. When dumping wort-soaked grain in leftover low-gravity wort while cleaning up after a brew day, did you ever wonder what your true efficiency would be if that wort made its way to the kettle instead? Using the brew bag, a fabric filter for all mash tuns and brewing methods, allows you to capture every last drop of wort. Not only does this increase kettle efficiency, it lowers your grain bill, which saves you money. Throwing wort in the trash is like dumping a 12-pack down the drain and just doesn't make sense. Use the brew bag and leave no wort behind. I've been using these filters for a long time and recommend them to everyone. I never have to worry about a stuck sparge and cleanup is fast and easy. Go grab yourself a brew bag fabric filter at brewinabag.com and be sure to use code TBP17 at checkout to get a discount on your order. Family-owned Atlantic Brew Supply is the largest homebrew shop in the Southeast. No gimmicks, no multinational corporate overlords, and no BS. They offer exclusive malts, yeast, and more from local artisans, as well as award-winning recipe kits. They also sell professional brewing gear and cask equipment from sister companies ABS Commercial and Cask Supply. Most ingredients are available by the ounce, plus Atlantic Brew Supply has an on-site calculator to help you craft your best brew. Orders are processed same day, and 2-day shipping is guaranteed for East Coast customers. Get 15% off your first order using promo code BREWPOD, that's BRUPOD at AtlanticBrewSupply.com. After a long brew day, the last thing I want to do is waste more time chilling wort. I've tried so many different options, and ultimately I settled on the super efficient immersion chillers made by Jaded Brewing. With the King Cobra and Hydra, I'm able to chill my entire batch of wort from boiling to just a few degrees above groundwater temperature in as little as 6 minutes. If an immersion chiller is right for your brewery, then do yourself a favor and check out all of the rad options Jaded Brewing has to offer at jadedbrewing.com. And be sure to let them know Brewlosophy sent you. In the beginning, when my go-to approach involved using malt extract, you couldn't have paid me to swap my LME for DME. I was so convinced that it was of higher quality that there was just nothing you could do to convince me not to use it. It wasn't until I switched to all grain and started making yeast starters, like I mentioned earlier, that I even started using dry malt extract. But in doing so, I realized the resultant wort seemed at least different than when I would use LME, even on that smaller scale, which ultimately inspired me to compare the two in an experiment. We also got a ton of requests to do this one. So those requests don't go unheard. If you have a thought or an experiment idea for us, make sure to let us know, because we do heed your suggestions. So for this one, obviously I made 2 5-gallon batches of blonde ale, both of them using 100% Pilsner malt extract. I was absolutely certain that they came from the same manufacturer, which in this case was Briess, and I designed each wort to be the same OG. So what that meant was that I had to use slightly more liquid malt extract. I'm not sure, Kate, if there's like a percentage or a ratio that they say if you use LME, then you're going to need to use this much DME.
Yeah, I usually do about 20% more LME. For DME. DME is a little bit more concentrated, so I usually use 20% more for LME.
Which is about what I did in this one. I used 9 pounds of liquid malt extract. Again, this was the Briess Pilsner malt extract, and I used 7.5 pounds of the dry malt extract. So 9 of LME, 7.5 of DME, and that actually surprisingly got me to the same OG. So once the full volume, I collected the full volume of brewing water. That's the nice thing about this, is you get your brewing water, you warm it up, you add your malt extract, and you move right on to the boil. So once that water reached 175 degrees Fahrenheit for both batches, that's 79C, I cut the power to the kettles again, so I didn't want to scorch that extract, and I added the respective malt extract. Then I stirred to incorporate before turning my elements back on to bring that wort up to a boil. Each batch was boiled for 60 minutes with hops added at the same times. These were 100% Cascade hops, 20 grams at 60 minutes, 25 grams at 30 minutes, and then I believe 25 grams at 10 minutes as well. The OG for both was 1053. I was absolutely thrilled that my, I guess we can blame Beersmith for this, but that my calculations for amounts of extract to use worked. So I expected to see maybe a 2 or 3 point difference, but nope, sure. Both were exactly 1053. Equal amounts of wort from both batches were then racked to identical brew buckets that had been sanitized. At this point, I noticed a very, very obvious difference in the way each wort looked. Cade, you're probably looking at the photos now. Yeah. These weren't identical looking worts at this point.
No, yeah, I mean, they're totally different colors, surprisingly, shockingly different colors for being both Pilsner malt extract. I mean, Pilsner you expect to be Pilsner colored, like light, yellow straw, but that one with I think it's the liquid malt extract, that almost looks like brown.
Yeah. Well, and this is one of the things one of the questions that I had at this point in this process is I'm looking going, I did everything I could to get extracts that were similar in age. Not only that, but fresh. I think both of them had been packaged within like 2 months of the time that I was using it. They'd never been opened, so they were freshly opened at the time that I was using them. That is an experience that I have to say that I've had quite a bit when using LME, is that the beers come out a bit darker maybe than expected. That's not to say that they're bad or anything. Just that liquid malt extract does seem to, in terms of the way the beer looks or the wort looks, does seem to impart a darker color.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree, and I wish I knew the chemistry behind it. Maybe if somebody understands how this works, they can write in with feedback, and we can talk about it next week. But that's been totally anecdotal, but that's totally been my experience too. Every time I've brewed with LME versus DME, it's always been darker. The liquid malt extract has always been darker.
The weird part of that for me is that LME comes before DME. At least my understanding of the manufacturing process is that you would expect them to look similar, but they just don't. I was holding out a little bit of hope that maybe the fermentation process will equal things out a little bit. So I pitched a single pouch of Imperial Yeast A09 Pub into each batch and fermented them at 66 degrees Fahrenheit, 19C for 8 days. After 8 days of fermentation, I took hydrometer measurements that showed that, again, this was another thing. I sort of expected the LME batch, just based on experience, to not dry out as much. And that actually did happen. The LME batch finished at 1010 FG, whereas the DME batch finished at 1008. Not a huge difference. I actually expected the LME batch to finish a bit higher than 1010. So I was pleased with that at least.
Yeah, I mean those 2 points off. That's probably not even a noticeable difference.
No. Most people would say they were the same, right? We're using really fine, FG hydrometers. I think using a standard hydrometer, they would have looked almost identical. So good on LME there. I was glad to see that they attenuated about the same. Seeing as they were both at FG, I cold crashed the beers. I skipped fining with gelatin just in case there was some sort of a difference in clarity or something else that you might be able to say was because of the type of extract used. I just didn't want the gelatin to get in the way there. I packaged the beers a couple days later, burst carbonated them like usual, and then I let them condition for about a week before I started collecting data. Now, these beers did look about the same in terms of clarity, but other than that, they looked like absolutely different beers. that color difference did not go away.
I mean, if you had served me those 2 beers, like, this one would have been fun for a bias experiment, right?
Oh, totally.
Almost. But maybe not, depending on what the results were of the experience, or of the experiment. But yeah, that liquid malt extract one is so much darker. I mean, that's an amber, almost like Oktoberfest color.
Yeah.
And then the other one is light. It looks like probably not as light as like a normal Pilsner, but still pretty light and, fest beer colored.
Yeah.
It's amazing color difference. A very, very, very stark difference.
I'll tell you this. Again, my bias mind here. If I'm using malt extract to make a blonde ale, which is, I guess you could say that that's what I sort of designed this beer to be, was kind of a standard, moderately to low hopped blonde ale. If I'm going out and I'm spending all of this money on liquid malt extract to produce a blonde ale that looks amber, that's going to annoy the hell out of me. I mean, I'm just saying, as a brewer, we care about things like that, or at least we used to, about the way the beer looks.
We still care about those things. I mean, that's one of the things, one of the reasons I'm a styles guy, and I know that kind of pisses a bunch of people off because they don't want to be bound by styles. but I'm a styles guy because I like the beer to be described to me so that I can know what I'm drinking.
Yeah.
Right? I want a blonde beer to look blonde. I don't want a blonde beer to be black.
Copper. Yeah, exactly.
Copper.
Exactly.
Or those things mean different things to me, and taste. Now, I know, I mean, you yourself have done bias experiments about coloring the beer and how flavors are perceived by, or how flavor and aroma can be perverted by visual aspects, even if there's not a difference in the beer.
Yeah.
But that's also, I mean, that's what I want to see. So whenever I'm brewing, this is one of the reasons why I switched from extracts to all grain, so that I could have more control over the color of the beer. I kept finding that my beer was always darker. I used mostly liquid, not as much dry malt extract. And I kept noticing that my beer was always darker, and I didn't like that. I wanted the beer to look like what I expected it to look like.
And when that beer is darker, you are going, I just feel like, if I'm making a blonde ale and I end up with a copper colored blonde ale, which sounds oxymoronic, and I'm drinking that, the way that beer looks is going to influence the way that I perceive it on my palate and in my nose. And for me, that usually means that I'm going to perceive maybe a little bit more caramel, maybe slightly more toast or something like that. That's the reason when we do triangle tests, we don't let people see the beers. We use opaque colored cups so that all they're looking at is, at the very best, they're looking at the foam, which in this case, I guess the LME beer had slightly more beige head, but you couldn't tell that in these colored cups. They looked identical in the cups. So before I served these to participants, I actually performed 6 different triangle tests myself, and I was absolutely convinced just by the way these beers looked and what the conceptions that I was getting as I was sampling these beers side by side, that I was going to nail this one and just knock it out of the park. I actually got 2 of my 6 triangle test attempts wrong. These beers tasted way more similar than you'd expect. Now, 4 out of 6 technically is, pretty consistent. You could say that I could with decent confidence tell these beers apart. But the fact that I couldn't do it 100% of the time, it was pretty surprising to me, just given how different these beers looked.
Yeah, I love that's my favorite part of doing triangle tests. It's so fun to watch people that have never done the triangle test before. Yeah, I feel like a lot of people who haven't done the triangle test will say like, "Oh, I could pick out the difference. I could pick out the difference."
Oh yeah.
When you're in there with the triangle test, it's really hard, even if the beers are different. I mean, 4 out of 6 attempts, I would say that's more likely than random guessing. I haven't done the probability calculations, but that's probably a pretty consistent result.
Yeah, it is. I mean, and when that jibes with what I kind of perceived as being different between the beers in the first place, just with drinking them unblind side by side, I would say that it was pretty consistent. But that, our experience on this isn't what matters. It's the blind tasters that we serve them to. I served these particular beers to 32 participants, so a nice chunk of folks out there. And with 32, you'd expect 16 to get it right in order for us to say that the experiment was significant. And in this case, 56% of people, 18 people actually identified the odd beer out when doing the blind triangle test. And again, they had no idea what the variable was. They didn't even see the beers. They just had 3 beers served to them. 1 was different, 2 were identical. And 18 out of 32 people were able to identify the unique sample, which says that these beers were more than likely, or more, at the very least, they were more different than they were similar. Pretty good results that seem to indicate that the idea that you can supplant LME with DME or vice versa may not necessarily be as true as a lot of us have been led to believe.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, 18 people. I mean, that's a lot. That's over half, 56% of the people that were able to tell these beers apart. It aligned with your personal impressions. So to me, it seems like there is some sort of flavor difference. At least we can say that this experiment said that. Flavor difference between LME and DME. I'd be interested to see what the preference data was on this one.
Yeah, the preference data is a surprising one, as it always is. But in addition, what we can say, I think, with at least a fair degree of confidence, is that LME is going to produce a beer that looks, tastes, and smells at least somewhat different than DME. And it's up to you as the brewer to determine what it is that you want. In this case, people are like, which one did people like more? Again, 18 people who selected the unique sample accurately. Those were 18 people went on to do the preference selection. So they were asked to just compare the 2 beers that were different and pick the one that they liked the most, still without knowing what the variable was or which one was in each cup. 7 people preferred the liquid malt extract beer. 7 people preferred the dry malt extract beer. Yeah. 2 had no preference despite noticing a difference, and 2 people reported perceiving no difference. That's stats for you.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I love that. I love those the preference findings. It just further emphasizes to me that preference data is totally subjective.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and that's the thing is, if I could tell you my opinions as to LME and DME. Those are my opinions. You don't need to glom onto what somebody else's preferences are. You need to try it out for yourself to determine what you want. For me, particularly in this case, if I'm using extracts to make a beer, if I'm making anything darker than, say, a amber ale, then yeah, maybe I'll use liquid malt extract, because it does seem to impart a slightly richer malt character, a little bit more caramel to my palate. Whereas DME is just, again, I feel like both still had that characteristic malt extract flavor. You can shoot me if you want to, but I do seem to perceive a very distinct characteristic in beers that are made with malt extract of either sort. So they both had that, but they were definitely different. The dry malt extract was cleaner, more blonde ale-like. I wouldn't say, I don't know if you could get away with making a, like perfectly to style Pilsner or something with dry malt extract, but you could get close, certainly closer than you would with liquid malt extract in terms of the way it looks and tastes. But again, those are my opinions. So my preference in the end would be for dry malt extract. And I think it's also a little bit cheaper than liquid malt extract. So.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. That's also surprising too. If you think about it, there's an additional industrial process, but DME is cheaper.
Yeah, exactly. And you don't have to use as much.
Yeah, exactly. And you don't have to use as much. No, I think this experiment was really, really interesting to me, because I would have thought, especially knowing what I know about the process, it's literally, the LME and then one industrial or a little bit further down the line. Maybe it's not one industrial process, but not far down the line. you make DME from essentially the same stuff that was liquid malt extract.
And yet they're producing different characteristics in beer. I think that's pretty interesting stuff.
Yeah, totally. So. I love this. I do want to say too, using LME and DME, it's a great idea if you're limited on doing all grain, or if you just don't want to spend the time to do the mash. I mean, I'm not going to fault anybody for doing that. I still make box cake mixes, even though I love to make homemade cakes every now and then too. I just don't like to put in the time that's required to do a full, eggs and flour and all that kind of stuff. I'd rather just dump the box in there. And if that's producing, good beer for you, it's great. I mean, LME and DME, great for beginners, great for even advanced brewers that just don't want to deal with the mash.
Yeah.
And the fact that you had equally split in terms of LME and DME in this, you use either or both for preference. And even though they may have tasted, use the one that you like better for your taste.
Right. And there are people who are using 60% LME and 40% DME. I've seen that as well. So and that's I guess you do have a little bit of control. Also, if you are doing steeping grains, then that you're going to get more character. Out of that beer as well. Not everyone's using just 100% malt extract. So
that's true. I honestly don't see that very much anymore. Most people that are doing it are doing the partial steeping, partial mash.
Yeah, exactly. So, well, we got a bunch of reader comments on this one, as you might expect. We're going to go ahead and go through some of those now. Aaron said, I was always told that DME is more shelf stable. I've seen some god-awful beers brewed with LME due to browning of the LME in the can.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about this. I think that there's definitely LME is definitely purported to be less shelf stable. I don't remember what the results of was it Malcolm that did the experiment?
Yeah, I'm almost certain it was a significant difference between those two beers.
Yeah, but I mean, I can just see, like you said, like the color difference just in the LME versus the DME, and the fact that it produced a flavor difference. Those things point me in the direction of thinking that there's something that's still happening. There's some reactions that are still happening in that liquid malt extract that aren't happening in the dry malt extract.
Yeah,
and it's causing this.
I think that we can, again, fair degree of confidence say that it's probably oxidation. That oxygen is having some sort of an interactive effect on that malt extract. Some people might like that though. I mean, and that's the thing is, we can't say it enough that preference is subjective. If you're into that more caramely, hard candy flavored type of beer, maybe LME is your thing. But I'd be really hesitant to use LME that's any older than maybe sitting on the shelf for longer than 3 months or so. I'm not into that. So DME, that being said, I've had DME sit in unopened in a bag in my brew shelf for about a year and a half, and I go to it and it's perfectly fine.
Use it for a starter. If you've got the LME just sitting around, use it for a starter. There's nothing that, the sugars are still there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. All right. Next comment comes from Charlie. He says, I've been homebrewing for a couple years now and have yet to make the jump to all grain. About a year ago, I made the switch from getting kits at my LHBS to making my own recipes with just DME. Since late edition IPAs are my go-to, I think he means late hop edition, a simple grain bill of DME works perfect, and I only need to boil 10 to 15 minutes. Ooh, we didn't talk about this, which really helps with the time constraints of my family life.
Oh yeah, good point. That's a great point. We didn't talk about like I said, I kind of mentioned it a little bit. Whenever I was adding like the second half of my liquid malt extract at 10 or 15 minutes, all I'm doing there is sanitizing. I'm not actually trying to boil the wort or get any hop bitterness. So yeah, I mean, this is what I would call sort of an advanced use of DME or LME, right? I mean, you're no longer just beginning, but you're now thinking about your recipe, and if you're adding all of your hops at Whirlpool or at dry hop, maybe you don't need to boil as long. So that cuts off a whole nother, hour of your brewing process. You didn't have to do mash. You don't have to boil 10 or 15 minutes, and then you're dumping in dry hops and Whirlpool hops. Hell yeah, that's a fast brew day.
Definitely.
It'd be fun to do an any IPA like that, a New England IPA.
I think you could get away with doing quite a few styles this way. We know folks who I have plenty of friends who need to throw, I got to throw together a batch for this party in a couple of weeks. I don't have time for a brew day, and they just do a 15-minute boil with a ton of hops. I've had some really nice hoppy beers made that way. 15-minute boil, just straight DME or LME, a bunch of hops, chill it down, ferment it well, and they come out tasting pretty good. I mean, you can get away with a lot when it comes to malt extract. So good point on that one, Charlie. Next comment comes from Greg. He says, I'm a pro brewer here. You can easily make professional quality beer with Briess DME. Not so much with LME, unfortunately, although you can't really simulate white wheat or Pilsner malt very well, in my opinion. I've totally done DME pilot batches to mess with customers, though, even to the point of just mixing it with 180 degree Fahrenheit water from the tankless water heater, throwing in a bunch of hops, then chilling. You can absolutely make great beer. Just stay away from LME, he says.
Yeah. I mean, cool. I mean, this seems like, Greg, I think your preference is pretty clear here on the LME and versus DME. I also think it's funny that you're messing with your customers by doing DME batches. I'd like to know where your brewery is.
Yeah, I know. It'd be fun to go and try those.
Yeah, it would be fun. It would really, really be fun to do that.
Well, I like the idea. He's saying I don't have the conversion in front of me, but 180 Fahrenheit, water, just mixing in the DME and not even bringing it to a boil. I don't know if how he's getting any hop character in those beers, but that sort of makes sense. I remember I forget what they call it. I think it's over in England. They used to have, or maybe they still do, home brewing kits that literally were like hopped extract that you would just blend with warm water, chill, and then ferment.
We could have talked about that. I mean, we kind of glazed over that, but a bunch of liquid malt extracts come hopped, or you can purchase them hopped. I mean, Mr. Beer, if you're using those kits, that's what I started on. Not all of them, but most of their extracts come pre-hopped.
That sounds so gross to me, but I don't know if I've ever had one actually. I made one Mr. Beer kit, and it was because somebody found it like in their attic and gave it to me, and it was like 10 years old. I mean, it didn't come out good at all. It was horrible, but I don't know if I've ever had a beer, like a Mr. Beer beer, or at the very least, a beer made using one of these hopped extracts without a boil and all of that stuff. But it seems like it'd be kind of difficult to make. Taste good.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, that's where I started, and I think I mentioned in my bio page, my first batch, my friend telling me, yeah, that's not my style, man, which is a really nice way to say, no, I'm not drinking that.
Yeah.
But I started with Mr. Beer. It's what got me into the hobby, and so I'm not gonna hate on it. If that's your entry point into the hobby, then power to you.
Yeah, it sounds like a fun idea at the very least. So that's
Yeah,
cool info there, Greg. Peter says, this is a great experiment. Thanks for doing it. You are welcome. Like most, I started with kits, then used extract, and then all grain. Once I started all grain, I never looked back. However, when I was brewing with extract, it was almost always DME. I used DME over LME for essentially the same reason that I find with gelatin. Appearance of my beer is important to me. Cheers to you, Peter. He says, I probably can't measure this, but to me, I suspect that the visual difference between LME and DME has a greater positive impact on the final beer than any potential difference of quality between LME and DME. So it sounds to me like he might be speaking to that bias component, right? That the way that they look is going to impact the way that or that some people might, I guess, appreciate the beer in the end.
Right. I mean, the visual difference for sure. I mean, if you had served me your beer in a clear glass, this beer that you brewed, and said, hey, here's a blonde ale, can you tell the difference in these two things? And you served me the one that had dry malt extract that was so much lighter, and then the amber one, I would absolutely taste caramel colors.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
A high likelihood that I would taste caramel in the amber one.
So that's, I didn't bring this up in the results section, but when I do these experiments, once I'm done collecting the data, I do have a little bit of fun. I tend to have a little bit of fun with the beers, and particularly seeing as these ones tasted so different. I served the liquid malt extract. That keg actually kicked faster than the dry malt extract one, and it was because I was messing with people so much with it. I was having fun with it. And what I was doing was pouring it off and telling people, what style do you think this is? And almost, I was going to say like ubiquitously, but a lot of people don't understand beer styles. A lot of people, those who are kind of well-versed in beer styles, my BJCP judge friends, all that stuff, were almost always saying, oh, this tastes like a ESB, or it tastes like a, some other amber, copper
American
style.
amber,
yeah.
Something like that.
Not even an American amber, though. the Cascade malt the Cascade hops did seem to get kind of overwhelmed by the malt, that extract flavor, that malty. Yeah. It wasn't a bad thing though. Both beers ended up being quite tasty. I did not dump either keg. I didn't have to. But it was fun to hear people call this what was, I put it in quotes, a blonde ale that did not look blonde, to try to, they were classifying it based on the way it looked as opposed to the way it tasted, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. That's fun. I wish I could have. I'd love to play around with my people that are drinking my beers too.
Oh yeah,
that would have been a lot of fun, especially when you can mess with a BJCP judge.
Oh, they're the best, right? Put them in their place, man. I am one. I think you are too, right?
Me too. Yeah.
So we're making fun of our ilk here. So
of course.
All right. Final comment comes from Paul Graham, who says, "My experience with extract beers, even tasting them now, is that you can almost immediately tell it is a homebrew." He's going to get in trouble for this one. There's a lack of body and depth to most of the ones I've ever made or tasted. For that reason alone, I urge noobs to go into brew in a bag or another all grain method rather quickly. I've seen more than one extract brewer become disenchanted because their beers didn't taste like the others in the homebrew groups that I've been a member of over the years. I'm going to side with Paul on this one, that I do believe that a lot of what people term homebrew flavor might be a perceptible quality from the malt extract that they're using. You get a lot of people out there, people who have loud voices and who are saying, "Oh, you can make perfectly good beer using malt extracts." You absolutely can. I don't think you're going to make a beer that is comparable to an all grain beer unless it's like a stout maybe, or something that is just so characterful that it covers up whatever that extract flavor is. So yes, can you make really good, potentially even award-winning beers using malt extract? I think so. I also think that it's a lot easier to produce a beer that tastes commercial when you're doing all grain. That's not to say people shouldn't use extracts, but I do think that, and the argument that, and I can go on this one forever, the argument that it's using malt extract is easier, I think is or takes less time or whatever. I think it's kind of faulty, because as we've shown with our short and shoddy batches and brew in a bag and using certain methods, you could easily get away with making a full all grain batch in under 2 hours brew day, which is about what people are doing with malt extracts as well. So I don't know. Yeah. I don't want to diss anyone who's using or prefers using extracts, but I do think that in my experience that all grain methods do tend to produce more beery flavored beers in the end.
I'm the opposite. Probably.
You're fired, man.
I know, right? Done. Or subject for a future Brews Views podcast. But no, I just I mean, let me see how I want to phrase this.
Yeah, you're gonna get into trouble here, Cade. You got to be careful.
I am, but that's okay. Shoot me your feedback, and I'll respond as soon as I can. But yeah, no, I think I would say a lot of the people that are using extracts are beginning brewers, and so they're still learning how to ferment properly, clean their equipment properly, condition properly,
sanitize properly,
bottle, package properly, all of those kind of things. And I mean, there's a lot of time and effort that goes into it. People start getting into the hobby because extract is much more approachable than all grain. But I will say all of the National Homebrew Competition recipes that are gold medal winners, even if they were all grain batches whenever they were brewed, all get released with an extract version of the recipe. And there's a reason for that, right? It's because even if you can't make, I'm not going to say even if you can't make, you may be able to make the same quality beer using the extract version and the all grain version. There, I said it.
And we've got experiments on this as well. We'll save those for another show. But any time that I've ever done, not any time, but for the most part, if you're doing an extract recipe and then comparing it to an all grain recipe, they look and taste different. And that's my experience. That's not to say one is necessarily universally better than the other, though I have my bias and opinions. And
nice.
Well, I think that was a good one. That was a good comment to end on. It was a lot of fun to talk about that kind of stuff. And I like the idea of potentially making thoughts on extract of Brews Views. Maybe we'll get that one planned. Kay, do you have any final words before we part ways, man?
No. Just real quick. So I like using extract for those purposes that we said. But having total control of the process is why I do all grain. And it's just a lot of freaking fun,
Yeah.
To do a mash and crush your grains and start, do it from scratch. It feels so much more hands-on.
Yeah.
So anybody out there that's using extract, that's a beginning brewer that wants to approach all grain, it's really not as scary as it sounds. And it's a lot of fun. And there's a lot of ways that you can continue to use extract even after you switch to all grain.
Couldn't agree more, man. Well, don't forget to head over to brewlosophy.com to read up on the experiment discussed in this episode, as well as everything else we're up to. The Brewlosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors, as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to brewlosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit patreon.com/brewlosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brewlosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey, cause it suits my bro. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman no more.